Lourdes, on that point?
Yes.
I'm sure you hear some voices in Latin America on that.
Well, not only Latin America, but yes, it's really very hard to have a group in which everybody, well, all those who are not there, doesn't feel they should be included. Long time ago, when we worked with the G8 on this G5 outreach, it was a smaller grouping, and it was also very much criticized. But I do believe if you want to have some kind of efficiency and capacity to work among the leaders, you cannot have everybody at the table. And when you're excluded, of course, you think, why is that country there and I'm not there? But yes, we have to make this outreach. And even though it's not only 20 countries, sometimes in the room you have the other 5 countries which are guests, 25, plus international organizations, you almost have 30 countries sitting, 30 people sitting at the table, which is really not that efficient either. So I do believe the best idea is well, the Koreans did a great job having this special ambassador. We have appointed a special envoy for G20 matters, which is trying to do also part of the outreach. Myself, as much as my time can allow it, I will do that. And the idea is to do it through the UN very much. There's a 3G also group, which we collaborate very much with this group, and going through the international organizations. And I don't believe Mexico will represent anybody, because I don't think we have that capacity. But Mexico can consult other groups and other countries and try to bring along and understand what their concerns, and share what we are doing, and listen to what they think. And it's not only countries. My experience so far is there's a big number of international organizations, of think tanks, who have a lot to say, and which we're taking into account. My only concern is that most of them have a very specific issue to include in the agenda. And if you include all the issues on the agenda, you just turn out to be the UN, and without the capacity to deliver as much as you want. So I think there's no easy solution for this, but the idea is to be as representative as you can be, and bring along and understand the voices of everybody.
Thank you very much. Jacob, any thoughts on this specific point before we turn to some other issues? As somebody who has no official, defense, so to speak, to follow.
Well, as a former official of the IMF and governor for the IMF, I obviously agree with you, the premise of your first question, which is the IMF is the true global universal institutions. All other subgroups are there not in order to weaken the IMF, but rather in order to support. Not every small country can be in the driver's seat, because the role of the international organizations, the way I see it, is to create the international economic and financial environment which will be friendly, within which each country does its best. So every country still has the responsibility to do the right economic policies. Not every country is impacting on the global economy because some are small. That's the role of the big boys. They have to provide a stable environment for the rest of the world, and then everyone will be living happily ever after. Speaking of this, I don't know if you want me to move on. I think you do. Something about maybe Europe at long last.
Let me say a few words first on that, Jacob. No, I think I would like to perhaps move the discussion to the following point, and the European issue will come in. And that is in the whole interaction between regional problems, regional challenges, and the global challenge. And in the European context, there is actually quite a debate on the euro crisis, the crisis in the Eurozone. Is this just a matter for Europe? In which case, it is really the European institutions by themselves that should address it? Or is it part of a global challenge? And if it's part of a global challenge, then both the G20 as a global steering group and the IMF as a global financial macroeconomic organization have a role to play. We saw in the decision that came out of the summit yesterday that actually specifically the IMF is being given a role. In other words, or is being asked for a role. The European leaders are saying that we will ask our central banks to lend to the IMF, and then the IMF can have some supportive programs. We saw in the Cannes summit how the European crisis took a dominant role in the discussions of the G20. So I guess there is a link. But the question is, how does the G20, or at least part of the question is, how does the G20 deal with regional issues? And I think maybe to start that discussion, Jacob, you can say a few words on Europe, but I would like to not just have the discussion on Europe per se, but on the links between the European crisis and the global economy.
Thank you, absolutely. To begin with, modern era political borders are not defense for economic shocks. Economic and financial shocks, like viruses, like health, like the environment, originate in one place but end everywhere else. As a result, we need to have an international framework, and the IMF is a good one. Yet, it originates somewhere. And in this particular case, the issue of Europe reflects governance and policies within Europe, so we need to address this one. So let me say a few words about that. Europe next year, 2011 is behind us. Europe next year is expected to grow today at minus 0.7%. Italy is expected to grow at minus 1.6%. France is expected to grow at minus 0.2%. We are around the zero. Is this satisfactory? Is this what the originators of the Euro dream had in mind? But does it mean that we need to give up the dream or find out what went wrong? You know, somebody said that if you want your dream to come true, you have to wake up first. So it seems that we now got the wake-up call. And the wake-up call is loud and clear, with a good opportunity for a new beginning. There is all the motivation in the world of the public or of the political arena. You can ask yourself, and why didn't they do it before? You know, the issue of motivation is an important issue. And let me bring some smiles to your face in these gloomy days. There was this guy who was condemned to die, and he was taken to the electric chair. But he was so big, he did not fit the chair. So he was told, go home on a diet and come back in 6 months. He came back after 6 months, much bigger. And he was asked, why didn't you go on a diet? I did not have motivation. Well, the reality is that when it comes to the European situation, and the last weekend is a great example, is that when there is a perception that the back is to the wall, there is a willingness to re-examine things that were never on the table. So let me look for a minute at 2 or 3 things that were not on the table. First, some of you are lawyers. Let me ask you, how many contracts would you approve if they never had an exit clause? Well, the contract of the Eurozone was based on the premise that the absence of an exit clause is an asset that will increase credibility. Well, it's a beautiful thing not to have a window when there is no fire. But then when there is a fire, you need to have a door, and we need to specify in advance what are the rules. There was the Stability and Growth Pact that governed the Maastricht Treaty, which was violated immediately by France and Germany. But in this S&G, Stability and Growth Pact, most of the focus was on the S. Very little was put on the G, on the growth. There is the EMU, Economic and Monetary Union. Most of the effort was put on the M, monetary. very little on the E, the economic. And if one looks back, one says the sustainability of an arrangement is not only that it brings stability, but it also brings growth. Where did we fail about the growth? And this brings me to your question, Mr. Chairman. If you look today at Europe, you see that during the past decade, some countries lost significantly competitiveness. Italy is a primary example. Some gained significantly competitiveness. Germany is a prime example. Well, obviously, a big gap happened within the family. And when you have big gaps in the family, do you have a way to reconcile it? These gaps have reflected themselves in very large surpluses of Germany over the years in the current account of the balance of payments, 5% per annum, that financed very large deficits on the part of the other parts of Europe, Portugal, Ireland, Spain, Greece, you name it. In the aggregate, Europe was relatively balanced. And for many years, European leaders were proud of it. We do not contribute to imbalances in the world, in contrast with Asia and the US. But the cancer was in between, because the intra-European imbalances were very large, which means that as we have an opportunity to start again, we need to make sure that first, large intra-European imbalances are not allowed to develop because they create very large debt. And we have learned that even private debt becomes sovereign debt when there is a crisis. And that sovereign debt crisis is really the mechanism that can destroy democracies. It can destroy middle class and can give the right to do policies that should never be introduced, but with the excuse of emergency, government finds it attractive. Issue of doing the wrong things for good causes are haunting us because we do not design the exit strategy from a highway that we never want to go in. So we need clarity, we need governance that is correct, we need to focus on growth, and we need to have a situation where the euro, which has eliminated the currency risk, it has not eliminated the credit risk. Yet each country is so different in terms of its credit class. And that's why it was so difficult to introduce a pan-European bond, because they don't belong to the same bed. If one has the chance for a new beginning, one needs really to focus on this. And final remark, so much of the public debate was about how much money will be put on the table. How much will the IMF have, how much the European Union, how much this and how much that. That money is used to finance a transition period. But we must make sure that during that transition period, there is enough adjustment in the countries in question that at the end of the journey, there will be no need for that money. So the focus again is on structural measures and not just on the financing. There is a challenge. The political clock is such that you need much more time to bring about outcomes than the economic clock and the market clock. And how do you reconcile them? You can reconcile them only if you portray credibility. And so that a word about a promised future is believed. And you know, there was a time 20 years ago when there was John Cash, there was Steve Jobs, there was Bob Hope, and now there is no Cash, no Jobs, and a little hope. So you need to have